The studio buzzed with anticipation as the cameras adjusted their focus, capturing every detail of the sleek, polished set. The overhead lights shone just a little too brightly, reflecting off the glass table between the two figures seated across from each other. On one side sat Barron Trump, poised and composed, his tailored suit impeccable, his expression unreadable yet confident. Though young, he carried himself with a quiet strength, a presence shaped by both privilege and pressure, a reflection of the weight that came with his last name. Opposite him sat Lisa Carter, a seasoned television host known for her sharp, incisive questioning and her ability to turn even the most composed guests into flustered subjects. She had built a reputation as someone who didn't just conduct interviews, she controlled them. Her audience expected nothing less than a performance, a display of intellectual dominance. Tonight, she was prepared to challenge Barron, to test his ability to hold his own in the public arena. At first, the conversation flowed smoothly, touching on politics, culture, and the unique experience of growing up in the spotlight. Lisa led with charm, her voice smooth, her words carefully measured. She knew the rules of the game: ease the guest in, let them lower their guard, and then strike when they least expect it. Barron, however, didn't seem fazed. He answered thoughtfully, his tone steady, his demeanor unwavering. Then, the moment came. Lisa shifted in her chair, her expression tightening ever so slightly. Her voice took on a sharper edge as she directed her gaze toward the small silver cross resting against Barron's chest. With a calculated pause, she issued the challenge that would change the entire course of the interview. Take it off. The energy in the studio shifted the moment the words left Lisa Carter's lips. Take it off. A simple command, yet it carried the weight of something far greater than just a piece of jewelry. The audience, caught mid-breath, hesitated, their reaction suspended in the charged silence that followed. Barron Trump, sitting across from her, didn't flinch. His hand instinctively brushed the small silver cross pendant resting against his chest, not in fear or defiance, but in an almost unconscious affirmation of what it meant to him. Lisa leaned forward, her tone neutral yet pressing. You talk about unity and inclusivity, she continued, tilting her head slightly, but isn't that necklace a symbol of exclusivity? A declaration of division? Her words were deliberate, meant to corner him into a response that could be framed as outdated, out of touch. It was a familiar strategy, one she had used countless times before: challenge, provoke, and force the guest to either retreat or stumble. But Barron didn't react the way she expected. He didn't shift in his seat, didn't rush to defend himself, didn't let the moment control him. Instead, he let the silence linger, unshaken. The air grew heavier with the unspoken tension, so thick that even those who usually sided with Lisa found themselves unsure of how to respond. The audience, typically quick to applaud her sharp rhetoric, remained silent. For the first time in the interview, it wasn't Lisa setting the pace, it was Barron. He understood what this moment had become. This wasn't just about a necklace. This was about something deeper: the right to hold one's beliefs in a society that claimed to value diversity. And in that moment of stillness, as the cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion, it became clear, this wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a defining moment. Lisa Carter was used to controlling the conversation. She thrived in the space where she could push, challenge, and dismantle an argument piece by piece. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was up against someone who wasn't playing by the usual rules. Barron Trump didn't rush to defend himself. He didn't stumble or lash out. Instead, he let the moment settle, let Lisa's words hang in the air, heavy with implication. And then, with deliberate calm, he finally spoke. Are you actually uncomfortable with my necklace, he asked, his voice measured, or are you uncomfortable with what it represents? A quiet gasp rippled through the audience. Lisa blinked, just for a fraction of a second, but on live television, even the smallest hesitation was magnified. She wasn't expecting this. She had framed the moment as a question of inclusivity, but now, Barron had turned the spotlight back onto her. Was she really advocating for inclusivity, Or was she drawing the very line of exclusion she claimed to oppose? He leaned forward slightly, mirroring her posture, but not in aggression, just in engagement. You say this is about fairness, he continued, so tell me, if someone sat here wearing a rainbow pin, would you ask them to take it off? The air in the studio thickened. Lisa inhaled sharply. She could feel it, the trap closing around her. The audience, once so reliably on her side, now watched with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Because they all knew the answer. Lisa's lips parted, searching for the right words, but before she could respond, Barron added softly, if power is the problem, then the solution should be fairness. Equal treatment. Right? In that moment, the debate wasn't about a necklace anymore. It was about principles, consistency, and whether the values Lisa claimed to defend truly applied to everyone. And for the first time in her career, Lisa Carter wasn't the one in control of the conversation. The silence in the studio was no longer just awkward, it was electric. The tension had shifted, and everyone in the room could feel it. Lisa Carter, the seasoned host known for her sharp, cutting questions, had just been outmaneuvered in a way no one saw coming. Barron Trump didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to argue. He had simply asked a question that exposed the contradiction at the heart of Lisa's argument. If fairness was truly the goal, then why was one symbol acceptable while another was considered divisive? It was a moment that was both disarming and undeniable. The audience, typically quick to cheer Lisa's confident takedowns, was suddenly hesitant. They glanced at one another, waiting to see how she would respond. On social media, the reaction was immediate. Clips of the exchange were already being clipped, posted, and debated in real time. Lisa took a slow breath, composing herself, but the damage was already done. Her fingers flexed against the cue cards in front of her, her polished exterior betraying the smallest flicker of frustration. She had spent years perfecting the art of debate, but this wasn't a debate anymore. It was something far bigger. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The pause stretched. And then, finally, she spoke. That's different. It was meant to be firm, to reassert control over the conversation. But instead, it fell flat. Barron tilted his head slightly, his expression thoughtful. Is it? He asked, his voice quiet, steady. A murmur moved through the audience. Because they knew. Everyone knew. If someone else had been sitting in that chair, wearing a different symbol, one that aligned with Lisa's worldview, this question would have never been asked. And for the first time, it wasn't just Barron making that realization. It was the people watching at home. Lisa shifted in her seat, trying to steer the conversation back on track. This isn't about other symbols, Barron, she said, her tone cooling. It's about power dynamics. For centuries, Christianity dominated Western culture. People were forced to conform. Now, we live in a more diverse society. Isn't it time we made space for everyone? Barron considered her words. Then, very deliberately, he lifted the silver cross between his fingers, holding it up slightly. You say this is about power, he said, his voice softer now, but clear, but you're the one asking me to take it off. The room went absolutely still. That was it. That was the moment. Lisa didn't have to respond, because the contradiction spoke for itself. She had framed this as a conversation about inclusivity, about fairness, about respecting all perspectives. But in the end, she had revealed what this really was, a demand for conformity under the guise of diversity. In the control room, a producer muttered under his breath, "We should cut to commercial." But it was too late. The moment had already happened. The internet had already decided. And as the camera zoomed in on Barron Trump's composed, unwavering expression, the audience understood something fundamental: this wasn't just an interview. It was a reckoning. The second the show cut to commercial, the tension in the studio dissolved into chaos. Lisa Carter yanked off her microphone, turning sharply to her producer, who was already striding toward her with a look of concern. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice clipped, professional, but laced with urgency. The producer hesitated, checking his phone where live analytics were pouring in by the second. He didn't need to say it. The answer was already written all over the screens in the control room. Twitter was on fire. Instagram was flooded with reaction videos. YouTube clips of the exchange had already racked up thousands of views in mere minutes. She had lost control of the interview, and worse, everyone saw it happen in real time. Back at the desk, Barron Trump hadn't moved. He remained seated, calm, collected, as if he hadn't just flipped the entire conversation on its head. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He just waited. And that, more than anything, was what unsettled Lisa. She had dealt with politicians, activists, and public figures before, people who played the game, who got defensive, who scrambled to recover when backed into a corner. But Barron? He had done the exact opposite. He had let the silence do the work for him. Meanwhile, outside the studio, the media world was already reacting. Social media erupts. Within minutes, hashtags started trending. Hashtag Barron Unshaken. Hashtag Checkmate Live. Hashtag Faith Under Fire. Comment sections across platforms told the same story. Did he just flip that entire argument around in 5 seconds? Lisa Carter just got checkmated, and he didn't even raise his voice. Why is she so pressed about a necklace? This is ridiculous. The conversation was no longer just about the interview, it was about something bigger. It was about fairness, about double standards, about whether public figures were truly allowed to hold beliefs that didn't fit neatly into an approved narrative. And the public had taken notice. The media scrambles. By the time the next morning rolled around, every major news outlet had picked up the story. CNN, Barron Trump defends faith in heated interview. Fox News, Lisa Carter stumbles as Barron Trump stands his ground. The Guardian, debate over religious symbols takes center stage in viral TV moment. The New York Times, a new generation enters the culture wars. But the real problem for Lisa wasn't just how conservative media was spinning it, it was that even left-leaning commentators were questioning her approach. Some of her usual supporters admitted. You don't ask someone to take off their beliefs and expect no pushback. If the roles were reversed, this wouldn't even be a debate. Respecting differences means respecting all differences, not just the ones you agree with. The backlash was swift and unrelenting. Lisa's own network scrambled to control the damage, releasing a carefully worded statement. Lisa Carter has long been an advocate for open dialogue, and last night's discussion sparked important conversations about representation, faith, and personal identity. We remain committed to fostering thoughtful debate on these complex topics. It was classic corporate speak, acknowledge the controversy, but don't admit fault. But behind the scenes, things were far less controlled. Sponsors were nervous. Some advertisers paused placements, waiting to see how the controversy unfolded. Network executives were holding emergency meetings, calculating whether Lisa Carter's reputation was strong enough to weather the storm. Because for the first time in her career, she wasn't just the one controlling the conversation, she was the conversation. Barron's silence speaks louder than words. And then, there was Barron. No social media posts. No press releases. No interviews. Nothing. And that, ironically, only made the moment grow bigger. The restraint was almost brilliant. While Lisa and her network scrambled to explain, clarify, and regain control, Barron didn't say a word. He let the moment breathe. He let the public reaction speak for itself. And then, 12 hours later, he finally broke his silence. A single post. Some things speak for themselves. No hashtags. No explanations. Just that. Within minutes, it had over 1 million likes. By the end of the day, it had surpassed 2 million. Political figures, celebrities, commentators, even some of his critics, retweeted it. It was the perfect response. Because in a media landscape where outrage was currency, where debates turned into shouting matches, where people scrambled to explain themselves, Barron had done the exact opposite. He had simply stood his ground. And America had watched it happen in real time. Days passed, and the impact of that single moment continued to reverberate through every corner of the media landscape. It wasn't just an interview anymore, it had become something bigger, something that transcended the boundaries of political debate and turned into a cultural flashpoint. Barron Trump, who had previously been seen as little more than a background figure in his family, had now become the face of a new kind of political presence. His response, or rather his refusal to react in the traditional way, had shaken the very foundations of the media game. For years, public figures had been trained to respond to challenges, to defend their positions in a way that showed strength through volume. The louder you were, the more visible you became. The sharper your retorts, the more control you had over the conversation. But Barron had broken that rule. He had redefined the art of political discourse by doing the exact opposite, by staying silent. And in doing so, he had shown a generation how to deal with controversy with nothing more than poise, calm, and an unshakable belief in one's own convictions. A turning point for media and public figures. The media world, which had long relied on control, on being the ones to dictate the terms of a debate, was now faced with a challenge. Barron's approach forced a fundamental shift in how public figures interacted with the media. No longer could they be easily cornered into a reactive position. No longer could they be forced into defending every piece of their identity or belief system. Barron had changed the rules, simply by not playing the game the way it had always been played. The reaction was swift and intense. Headlines across major outlets, like The Atlantic and The Guardian, reflected the divide this moment created. Some called it a generational shift, the moment when the old ways of debating, loud, aggressive, combative, were replaced by a new kind of discourse. A kind where conviction wasn't measured by volume, but by steadfast certainty. Even journalists and commentators who disagreed with Barron's views admitted the brilliance of his approach. It was clear, this wasn't just a story about Barron's silence. This was a conversation about the future of political dialogue, about how public figures engage with their audiences, and about what it means to stand firm in your beliefs in the face of public scrutiny. For the first time in history, a single moment had challenged the very structure of political discourse. It wasn't just about winning an argument anymore. It was about winning the conversation itself. Lisa struggled to recover. But as the media world spun its wheels in admiration of Barron's composure, Lisa Carter found herself trapped in the fallout. As one of the most respected interviewers in the industry, she was used to controlling the narrative, to framing every debate in a way that left her guests no room to maneuver. But in that moment, she had been outmaneuvered. Barron had forced her to face her own contradictions, and in doing so, she had lost the upper hand. Lisa's initial attempt to regain control was to make a calculated adjustment. She smiled tightly and tried to continue with the conversation, but the damage had already been done. Behind the scenes, executives scrambled to distance themselves from the controversy. Her network released a statement, but it was clear that no amount of corporate speak could undo the public's perception of what had happened. The backlash came not just from Barron's supporters, but from people who had always aligned with Lisa's point of view. In the weeks that followed, her reputation, previously untouchable, was tarnished. Sponsors pulled back. Advertisers re-evaluated their placements. Even Lisa's usual allies, those who shared her political beliefs, couldn't ignore the ethical dilemma she had presented. You don't ask someone to remove their beliefs and expect no pushback. The public was starting to demand more from its media figures: consistency, fairness, and, above all, respect for diversity. Barron Trump's philosophical shift. Meanwhile, Barron continued his silence. No social media posts. No follow-up interviews. Just the quiet confidence that had become his trademark. And then, finally, after days of letting the dust settle, he posted a simple tweet: "Conviction isn't loud. It doesn't demand. It doesn't attack. It just stands." The tweet wasn't just a message to Lisa Carter or her network, it was a declaration. A philosophy. And it struck a chord with millions. In a culture obsessed with shouting louder to be heard, Barron had demonstrated that sometimes, the loudest voice is the one that doesn't speak at all. His tweet went viral in less than a day, gaining millions of likes and retweets from every corner of the political spectrum. Even those who disagreed with his views had to admit that his quiet confidence had made a lasting impression. It wasn't just a moment of political mastery, it was a new way of engaging with the world, one that valued thoughtfulness over outrage, and strength over bombast. The lasting impact, a cultural reckoning. As months passed, the moment continued to resonate. It wasn't just about Barron Trump's victory in that interview, it was about what it represented for the future. His actions had exposed the limitations of traditional media discourse, challenged the tactics of so many political figures before him, and offered a new blueprint for those willing to stand their ground without ever raising their voice. The moment had sparked a nationwide conversation. Had we just witnessed the birth of a new kind of political presence? One that could handle challenges with dignity, that didn't require a platform of noise, but instead stood firm in the face of adversity with silence as its most powerful tool. Barron's legacy would be defined not by the controversies that surrounded him, but by how he had used those controversies to redefine the conversation itself. And in doing so, he had shown the world that sometimes, the most powerful words are the ones left unspoken. As the dust settled from the intense aftermath of Barron Trump's interview with Lisa Carter, the larger implications of that moment continued to reverberate far beyond the studio. It wasn't just an interview, it had become a cultural phenomenon. In a country where political battles were often fought with fiery rhetoric and sharp words, Barron had shown a different way to navigate the storm, a way defined not by anger or defensive posturing, but by calm assurance and unwavering conviction. For months leading up to that moment, Barron had largely existed in the background of the Trump family's public life. Reserved and private, he had rarely sought the spotlight, quietly living his life under the scrutiny that comes with being a member of one of the most famous families in America. But that night, he wasn't just the son of a president, he was Barron Trump, standing tall and unflinching in the face of a seasoned media figure trying to push him into a corner. What seemed like an ordinary interview quickly morphed into something much more significant, and in that space, Barron emerged as a figure of surprising strength. The reaction was swift and widespread. Social media platforms exploded with commentary. Commentators from both sides of the political spectrum began to dissect the exchange, offering analysis of Barron's composure, his precise questioning, and the calm dignity with which he had turned the tables on Lisa Carter. #BarronUnshaken trended worldwide, with millions of tweets and posts celebrating his quiet strength. The attention Barron received wasn't just about political alignment or partisan views, it was a recognition of the sheer power of self-assuredness in a world where public figures were often pushed to fight back with every tool at their disposal. Reinterpreting strength in the public eye. What Barron had done in that moment was redefine the very idea of strength in the public eye. For decades, the narrative in American politics had been clear: the strongest voices were the loudest, the most confrontational, the ones that could shout over their opposition. But Barron had shown that there was power in something far quieter, in stillness. He didn't need to argue, to yell, or to make grand gestures. Instead, he asked the question that everyone had been avoiding: if fairness is the standard, why is my belief any less valid than yours? That question hung in the air, unspoken but powerful. The silence that followed became his most powerful tool, forcing everyone, from the media to the public, to confront the contradiction in Lisa Carter's argument. Barron didn't respond with rage, he didn't flinch in the face of what could have been a humiliating moment. He simply stood firm, making it clear that his belief in his own values was not something to be questioned or stripped away. In a world where public figures were often expected to apologize or defend themselves, Barron stood firm and let his silence do the talking. This was a stark contrast to the usual political playbook, where confrontations were fought with words and sound bites designed to capture headlines. Barron's approach turned the entire narrative on its head. He had not just endured the attack, he had turned it into an opportunity to make a statement that transcended the immediate context of the interview. He had shown that sometimes, the most effective response is not a response at all. Lisa Carter's struggle to regain control. Meanwhile, Lisa Carter, once seen as a master of her craft, found herself on the defensive in ways she never anticipated. The polished, practiced veneer that had earned her fame and respect was beginning to crack under the pressure of the public's reaction. Her audience, once loyal to her sharp commentary, now questioned her approach. The backlash wasn't just from Barron's supporters, it came from across the political spectrum, from people who felt uncomfortable with the way she had tried to corner Barron into relinquishing his personal belief. In the wake of the interview, Lisa found herself trying to recalibrate, attempting to hold on to the very thing that had made her popular, her ability to control the conversation. But Barron's measured, almost disinterested silence had done something she had not expected. It had shifted the narrative in real time, making her seem like the one who had failed to live up to her own standards of fairness and open-mindedness. Her attempt to force Barron into a defensive position backfired. The internet, the media, and even those who had admired her for years were now questioning her ethics and her professionalism. The lasting legacy, a shift in political discourse. As the weeks turned into months, the conversation around Barron's interview didn't die down. It only grew. Barron's approach had revealed something deeper about the way we view power, media, and discourse. The quiet, steady conviction he displayed became a touchstone for those who believed that it was time for a new way of navigating public life, one where dialogue didn't devolve into shouting matches but instead allowed for true understanding and respect for different perspectives. Barron had not only handled a difficult situation with grace, he had fundamentally altered the conversation. In doing so, he not only gained the respect of those who supported him but also captured the attention of those who had never paid much attention to him before. His legacy would not just be one of political affiliation, it would be one of resilience, strength, and a commitment to standing by one's values, no matter the pressure to conform. In the months following the interview, the public would continue to reflect on Barron's actions that night. What had started as a simple exchange had evolved into a cultural reckoning, one that forced Americans to rethink what it truly meant to be strong in the public eye. And for Barron Trump, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where he was no longer just the son of a president, but a symbol of the power of quiet conviction in an era of endless noise. The story of Barron Trump's interview offers a valuable lesson in the power of silence, poise, and conviction. In today's fast-paced, often combative world, it's easy to believe that the loudest voice wins the argument. However, Barron's ability to stay calm and composed in the face of pressure reveals that strength isn't always about speaking the loudest, it's about staying true to your beliefs and responding thoughtfully. In real life, we often face situations where emotions run high, whether in personal relationships, work environments, or public discourse. The ability to remain calm, listen carefully, and respond with clarity can be far more effective than reacting impulsively or defensively. By not rushing to react, we allow ourselves the space to consider different perspectives and make decisions that align with our core values. The key takeaway is that true power lies in self-assurance and control, not in shouting over others. In difficult situations, pause, reflect, and respond with conviction, rather than getting swept up in the chaos. This approach fosters respect, encourages thoughtful conversation, and leads to better, more meaningful outcomes.